All right. Stacy, you want to take it away?
Let's go, let's go, let's go. This one isn't as good as the other one. Ready? Let's go, let's go, let's go to the show. What show? Yo ho, it's the Showrunner Show.
I think there should be a separate show about how to write these jingles for a show.
I
Oh my
know.
God, it's a dream come true.
I know. This is all Stacy does. Like she, yeah, she writes
I'm gonna
jingles
get
for
a
everything.
record deal. I'm gonna go on tour across the world, big in Japan, just singing these jingles. That's it.
Well, welcome to the Showrunner Show, where every week we demystify some aspect of the job of showrunning for anyone who works in TV, who wants to work in TV, or just wants to know how it's all made. This week we're talking with Nelson Greaves, and we're talking about rewriting, which Nelson, joined us on Joe Pickett season 2, and is maybe the best rewriter of anyone I've ever worked with.
Oh no!
And
Don't
no,
say that.
okay. No, but Nelson is able to, I don't know, sort of cut to the heart of things and reshape. Like you see the before and after of what Nelson does. Like he's really great at this, and I feel like so good at talking about the art of writing. So yeah, we wanted to talk that through with you and just how you, I don't know, how you go about it. What are you looking for specifically when you start? Like someone gives you an outline or script. What do you look for first?
Well, I think for me personally, it starts even before the rewriting. I think push me into a different place if this isn't what you want to talk about. But are we talking about sort of the entire process of a script being rewritten? So from the time a writer turns in a first draft till the time a script gets delivered to production, is that sort of what you want to talk about?
Yeah,
Do you want to leave outlines out of it then?
Maybe
Well,
we leave.
we don't have to.
Yeah,
Just the revision. Speaking of revision as opposed to rewriting, is that sort of the idea?
Yeah, let's talk. Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, I think per that, we don't have to talk about outlines, but when a script comes in, I think the most important thing is, well, I don't know if it's the most important. A very, very important thing is, I personally believe, letting the writers have a chance to do a revision of what they've done. I think there are a lot of showrunners who really just like to take it away at the moment that they do. And, there's a lot of different reasons for that. Some people really feel like, they just do a lot more writing. They really feel like they want to have a lot more ownership of the scripts and, just have them much more closely come from them, which is all, none of these are judgments. This is,
We hate those
people. But if you have time, because again, sometimes you don't have time. One of the reasons why sometimes writers don't get to rewrite their own things is because there's no time for that. We got to go straight to it. But if you have time, I think there's a lot of value in just giving notes first. And a thing that we did on Pickett, a process that I really liked, was basically giving notes and then just hopping on Zoom and be like, let's go through all of these notes because, these are things I wrote in between, who knows, like, maybe our morning, I quickly read this in, while on lunch because I got to do one other thing in the morning and, then we're running the room and, so a lot of the thoughts that went through my head might not necessarily have made it onto the paper in my notes, and I also think that notes, when you just get the text, can seem very like judgmental or angry. When you're just reading, and you're trying to get into the person, the showrunner's head of the note of like, oh my God, why didn't they say this? They just said this. And it's like, oh, because they were distracted by something. But like, you take something as a very personal affront. That wasn't that at all. And so, sending notes over, be like, let's go on Zoom, let's go through all of these.
Smart.
Going through notes.
And this is before you've even sent it up the chain, right? This is just the writer had their first draft, sent it to you. This is a
Yeah.
process just between the two of you, and then later you'll kick it up. Great,
Yes.
thank you.
Yeah. And going through and being like, okay, so, here's my first note. This is what this note meant. Let me give you context for that note. And sometimes I read that and I'm like, oh, and by the way, that's right. I had this other note about this that I forgot to put into a note. And so, being able to like sort of talk through, okay, these are the various things. This is what I meant by these notes. Now you have like an understanding of it. Go and rewrite and come back.
I love that. And it gives the writer the chance too to be like, I see you took it this way, or that point didn't get across. What I intended was this other thing over here. And it can be more like, oh, that's like, I love that intention. Maybe we could make that more clear by doing this. Like it becomes this, I don't know, collaborative chance for the writer to learn too. Like, it's one thing to see your thing rewritten and try to figure out the logic of one thing to the next. And it's another thing to be the hands on the keyboard and internalize, how to reshape something or,
Completely.
Especially if the show's going to run for a while and you're hoping they stay with it. Do you know what I mean? If they never get a chance to rewrite the main character's voice, how are they going to get better at it? And if you're hoping they're going to be there if you're got your fingers crossed for season 4, 5, and 6, it'd be nice if they learn how to write in the tone of the show, write in the voices of the show.
Yeah.
No, completely. And that's also a good chance. I think that one of the things that is like a more delicate thing to address is like writing style. And I think especially with younger writers, like, there's sometimes there's like baggage you're bringing in that is, is overly stylistic or, not just sort of the language of TV writing. And, there's just, you learn lessons along the way. And, in some ways it's like, I do think it's kind of true that the longer you do TV, it's very possible for your voice to get like diluted. And sort of when you become very good at imitating everyone else's voice, I think it is hard sometimes to be like, oh, right, but what is my voice? How do I write when I'm, but that said, this is the job. So if you are doing the job, it is your voice, your responsibility to imitate and stuff. And so that's a chance to very gently be like, hey, and when you're writing, like I have a thing about adverbs, which is like adverbs are like almost always, I think, unnecessary. But definitely there should never be two of them, for a single verb. And, I think this is something, in prose is completely different. It's like prose is about like the dance of the words and like, like that stuff matters so much. And I do think there's an element of that in writing action. And by action, and I just mean everything that isn't dialogue,
Yeah.
in scripts. But that's kind of a very mean thing to come across in a written note.
Yeah.
It feels like criticizing as opposed to like, hey, here's I think how you could do this more efficiently and stuff.
Yeah.
But giving them back to a writer, say, hey, here's a reasonable amount of time. Get it back to me during that time. Not too long. I think, it's like if you give them too long, I think it increases the likelihood that the thing you get back resembles what you want less, because, if there's too much time to go rethink through everything and re-break stuff, then that can be a problem. But like, here's a reasonable amount of time and get it back to me in whatever shape it's in. And then at that point, looking at it and, as a showrunner or, as, the number two who's ever doing this, it's the balance of how do I really keep what this writer has done and really like make sure I'm not losing the unique things that this writer has brought while, functionally bringing this in line with the tone of the show, correcting the characters' voices, sort of, a lot of it is kind of cleaning up and building out. So, sometimes it's like scenes just aren't quite everything they need to be. And so it's like finding what are the additional moments that are happening here. And sometimes it's like things are just a little bit messy. And, the longer you do it, knowing, okay, here are the things to trim, like actually the scene should end 4 couplets earlier,
Mm.
and
Yeah.
like we can tell the story in the cut. We don't need to take the scene all the way to the end. TV, unlike movies, there's TV kind of flows in this way that is different than screenwriting.
What do you mean by tell the story in the cut?
Tell the story in the cut. I mean, we don't need to see characters make up the decision. They can be like in the room. It's like, okay, what are we going to do? And then you can cut to the people on the subway and we understand, oh, what they decided to do was go on the subway. We don't have to see them be like, you know what? Let's take the subway.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you can even do extreme versions of that in TV that if you kind of step back and look at them objectively, don't make any sense.
Yeah.
But like, often it's like you're getting right to the moment where you get the last bit of information you need, and then you cut away to the next thing.
Yeah. Comedy, I feel like that's a very often in comedy. Like, I would never ever do this thing. Cut to them doing that thing or whatever. That's
Exactly.
I feel like a comedy trope that always works.
Exactly. And so it's like it's a lot of that, and those are lessons that you really just learn doing the job a lot, or you are a brilliant wunderkind who has internalized all these lessons before you've ever done the job.
Yeah. There's no way. Like I would say, in rewriting, so much of it is momentum. The momentum of structure. To your point, like I think, like, to start the scene at the start of the scene, not like someone shows up and then they have to go up, do a whole preamble before the scene starts. Like, either there's conflict right off the top in that, or, sort of starting the scene in the scene, you know what I mean? Like, or cliffhangers, not repeating exposition we already know, things like that. And I feel like so much of that, once you've gone through the process of editorial too,
Yeah.
a couple times, like, and you see things in the cut and you're like, oh my God, this episode drags. How do we pace this up? And we're like, oh, we could start the scene halfway through the scene here and end the scene, 3 lines earlier, and let the audience play the game of like keeping up, as opposed to like, I think there's a tendency to want to explain and like make sure everyone knows everything in the script stage. But then in editorial, it's like all these like lines and moments we've tortured. It's like in editorial, you're like, okay, that's gone and that's gone. You know what I mean? And there's just like the preciousness when a scene isn't working just evaporates. You know what I mean? It's like, oh gosh, this scene doesn't work. What can we do to give it life?
Yeah.
And usually the answer is, it's funny. Usually the answer in television writing, if something's not working, usually the answer is slow it down, build it out more. And in post, usually the answer is cut it down and make it shorter.
I remember you were working with Tak Fujimoto, the DP, on Devil, and you guys shot some opening to a scene that was just gorgeous. It was so beautiful, and it was before anyone spoke a line of dialogue. It was like, beautiful shot, land on the actors who begin to speak. And afterward, you were like, Tak, that was just gorgeous. And he was like, yeah, that's the first thing you're going to cut. and you were like, never.
I was like, I would never cut that. It's so beautiful.
So beautiful, and it gets cut, and it's sort of like, oh, that's.
He's like, when the movie's too long, it's the first thing you're going to cut. And he was right. Yeah, he was totally right. He knew. He's shot enough of those beautiful moments. And I
think it's true that like if you're going to have, if a moment is special enough or funny enough or beautiful enough that you really, really want to save it, you got to put it in the meat of the scene. It can't be some, little preamble of like, good to see you. Thanks so much. Have a seat. How's the weather? Pretty nice. Now let's get to the conflict. Like, my God, don't make that the gorgeous shot. It's just going to go.
Yeah, it's true.
I would say even though with that, you always have to be ready to murder any moment, no matter how dear you hold it. And I think, that is like a real value that someone else rewriting you can bring is like, and I do this in my writing all the time. I feel like I'm terribly cursed by having darlings. But it's like you have things that are just so, and they can be objectively great. They can be like, wow, this is such a great moment. But it's just like, but you know what? I've been trying to make this whole scene work around keeping this moment, as opposed to if I just kill this moment, then the whole scene can be what it is. And, maybe the scene should not be, maybe the scene should be 2 lines. And, I've been having the scene be bigger because I love this moment, but it's like, that's not actually what is serving the story. And
I keep accidentally
I,
writing like Franken scenes because in the room, it's not like you talk about a scene once. In the room, you got a specific scene, you're talking about it for days, sometimes over weeks. And during that time, people throw out fun little pieces of dialogue, right? And you write them down, and the writer's assistant writes them down. And then by the end, you got this one scene that has these 3 great lines, right? But maybe the lines are all doing the same thing. Maybe it's like the thing the heroine says before she drops the mic and leaves the room. I will kill myself to like stick those 3 lines in, and I write the entire scene based on like, okay, how the fuck, I keep swearing too much. How can I have these 3 lines? And I completely forget to think about like, what is the scene? How do people get into it? What do they want? What's the objective?
right.
What's the conflict? How do they get out? And I'm doing everything as though these are like 3 little gems that I want to set in a beautiful ring setting. And that's not the point at all. And they always end up going.
Stacy tends to like really think things through and then write like very specifically. I tend to like just write like what, you know what I mean? Like sort of do it, just say wing it. Like I'll write something 5 times, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I feel like I
Yeah.
tend to be like, oh, let's throw this out. Let's throw that out. Let's kill this.
Yeah. I feel just the opposite. I'm like, if I wanted to write something else, I would have written something else. So I don't want to get rid of this and put in something else, because if I wanted to do that, I would have done it already,
Yeah. But it's so funny. I feel like the job of like television or show, like, I feel like so much of the job is rewrites. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's of the value of, I guess, show running. I'd say like, 75% of that value is the ability to rewrite, to diagnose what is or isn't working in a scene, or what is or isn't working in the structure of an episode, or, and then to be able to articulate what needs to change to, you know what I mean, to fix that. Like, I feel like that's such like the big key, even more than writing, even more than being able to write from scratch. I feel like that rewriting skill is so important. And I feel like as a new writer, it's so tempting to be like, I don't want to be rewritten. I want to write this perfectly and have like, when in fact that process of like taking notes and having smart people giving you notes and helping you through some of that rewrite, like that might be more valuable than the actual writing the episodes to begin with.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's the old adage, which I do think is very true, of like writing is rewriting.
Yeah.
But I think there's another old adage, which I also think is true, is that like you make a movie, or any film content you make 3 times, you write it once, or when you write it on paper, you write it again when you shoot it, and you write it again in post. And it's really, having that full experience and understanding how much things change, and understanding, I remember early on, there was this joke that I loved, and I was like, I worked the whole scene around keeping this joke in, and then the actor couldn't deliver it. And I remember being on set, just being like tearing my hair out, like, this guy, he's like, he just doesn't know how to deliver this joke. And like, he had an accent, and it just like, he couldn't put the emphasis on the right. And, it was like, so then we had to like, quickly put something else there. But I think what you're saying of being like a shepherd of the story, and really knowing how to hold on to what the story is. And I think what the characters like, journey is, I think that being your job as a showrunner is to guide that through the entire process, and everything moves around that, as opposed to pieces that, you try to fit the story around those. It's like you're with characters and you're holding on to their emotional centers, and it's your job to man those through the stormy waters of the creation of an episode of TV.
I love that.
What was the joke?
I don't even know. I don't even
That would
remember.
be completely out of context.
I gotta say, yeah, like it's so often comedy, like certain actors can just crush those lines and some just can't. And it's like, to realize, I remember I did a movie, a couple, where I like wrote all these quippy lines for one character, and then the person just can't do them.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I guess
painful.
they're the serious sidekick, not the funny sidekick I planned on. You know what I mean? It's like,
I was with a sketch comedy group for years, and we wrote all our own stuff. And we were very of the opinion of like, there's only one way to deliver this line. It was written this way. This is how you deliver it. That's it. It's, and then to write for TV and hand those lines over. And in my mind, I still feel the same. There's only one way to say this. And then going, oh, no, that's not true at all. First of all, the actor may or may not have accurately remembered the written line. And then there's a million ways to deliver it. There's even a million funny ways to deliver something, but it could be all over the place. And a lot of times actors maybe just don't want to do something like maybe the actor doesn't like looking surprised. I think actors a lot of times don't want to look dumb because they've been mistreated by directors and editors in the past. And so they're protecting their careers a little bit. And so, but maybe the writer wants them to look surprised or dumb or shocked or whatever. And anyway, so there can be some resistance there. I have to say, I had this kind of overwhelming experience with season 1 of Joe Pickett of David Alan Grier. I wrote a bunch of lines that he said. And when he did them, I'm like, that's exactly what was in my head. And he was literally the only person who did it exactly, Anyway, it was a thrill.
Well, it's funny seeing like our kids showed up to watch the filming of this scene where David Alan Grier gets up on stage and he's talking. And our daughter, was like, wow, he sounds just like mom. It's like David Alan Grier, like channeling Stacy from the stage. And he did. It was so funny. Those two are kindred spirits,
He said applesauce like a swear word. That's something I wrote in, like, oh, applesauce. Like, oh, hell, But just, oh, applesauce. I think that's just delightful. And he delivered it so delightfully, Adverb.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Yeah.
Looping back to rewrites, what do you focus on first? Do you focus on structure first, dialogue first, story? Like or do you just kind of do it all at once?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very unsatisfying answer. I do it the same way I do with mine, which is in a completely, I'm a little here, a little here, a little here, a little here. I start by reading the thing. And I think often as I read, I will cut dialogue. I guess that's one of the first things I do is I cut. So I go through and, I think honestly, I probably have a habit of overcutting, and I often find myself going back and pulling some stuff that I cut back from old drafts. But going through and just, there's fat, there's trim and fat. And, it's like, if you don't lose it now, you're going to lose it in post. And going through and doing that first, I think after that, probably I build out slug lines. So, there was like one of the Pickett scripts specifically, there was sort of this big event happening. And, the writer, as we'd broken it, but it had been all under a single slug. And so, taking it and rather than trying to give the note of like, okay, there should be a slug here, there should be a slug here, it's like, let the writer go and write me the scene and write me emotionally the things that's happening. And then I can come in and do the sort of grunty or more technical stuff that I'm going to be, more particular about, of like, okay, let's map, in this like crazy attack thing, let's actually map how this is happening and, do, I don't want to say like do the hard work as if the writer wasn't worried to do that, but it's like, there was a particular way. I knew it was going to just be easier for me to leave it for me than to like try to communicate something that ultimately is a good lesson to learn and something good for someone to look at and be like, okay, I can learn from how this happened. So I would say that's the second big thing. And, the final thing is, I think the rewriting itself, making stuff better, trying to punch things. And, I do think it's a common thing, at least for me, it's like, I'll have deleted something and try to write something better, and I can't, and I'll just be like, you know what? The thing they'd written originally was better than, I aspired for something better, but I failed, and actually they got it. So, so I think that's sort of the process for me.
Yeah. Well, I'll say too, I feel like that humility, like to have the humility of going like, I cut this, I wanted to write something better. I don't like what I wrote better. I'm putting that like, I feel like that is one of the big keys to rewrites is just to, I don't know, like to not be like, I'm going to put all my stuff in this because you know what I mean? Like my writing is, or whatever, like to have that like best idea wins mentality versus my idea is best. You know what I mean? And I think that really, I don't know, that's a great way to
Yeah,
approach rewrites.
for sure. And I think it's like, I think about it's like when it's your show, it's like every word is yours. So, it's like you get to, I think being able to be like, no, if I use their better line, that's good for me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm the gatekeeper of all of this stuff and I'm choosing what to send through the gate. And so it's like, it reflects good on me to use the best thing.
Yeah.
And to not just have my stuff in, because no matter what, everyone's going to think it's all yours anyway. People don't, I mean, when you get to super fans and stuff, people definitely do. But it's like when people talk about Lost, it's like people aren't talking about like, who exactly. It's like, it's like Damon Lindelof. It's like The Leftovers. It's like people aren't like, oh my gosh, this writer on your day. It's like, no, it's like this is Damon Lindelof.
Yeah.
And so, and he obviously has very, very talented writers he's working with to make these things happen. But it's like he gets all the credit. So there's no point in making it worse just for your own ego, because you have nothing to gain from that, because you gain it all, or you get all the success and you get all the failure when it's the show you create.
That's great. When you were talking too about, cutting like sometimes good stuff, like Drew and I like to say the quality of the finished product is equal to the quality of the scenes you were willing to cut to get there. You know what I mean? Like if you're willing to cut amazing scenes, like Drew and I on our season 1 of Waco, we because we were inexperienced, people kept telling us our scripts were long. We're like, no, they're not. This is going to go by so fast. And we had to, we had 45-minute episodes, and our first cuts were 73 minutes long. And it was like, oh, they're going to kill us. They're going to kill. We spent millions of dollars shooting stuff, like tens of millions of dollars of stuff, shooting stuff that we don't have space for. And we're like, do we try to expand it to 8 episodes? And that didn't work. That didn't make any sense. So it just became this like fire drill of like, okay, how can we get the most across in the least number of scenes? And, one of those was, and one of the things we actually did this a lot in the writer's room, was the idea that if it had one of the 2 leads in a scene, any scene goes, but if neither of the 2, main people were in a scene, if the, I guess this gets a little in the weeds, but like, in the call sheet, it's like the number 1 is your lead and the number 2 is your second lead. And then it sort of goes, but if the number of the 2 people in a scene equals more than 10, if the sum of those numbers, then that scene has to die. And, we cut so much out of the writer's room based on, the, number 10 character and number 15 character. And it was a great scene, but because it wasn't one of the leads, that became, a litmus test for us early on, is don't write too many scenes. You can do a few, but don't write too many scenes between people who are deep on the call sheet. And I would say from an experience too, like, don't give the monologue to the day player. Like if there's a new person shows up into a scene that you've never met and delivers like half a page of dialogue, it's going to be somebody who may not be at the level that your leads are. Your leads, their strengths and you can write to those.
Although we gave a monologue to a day player in season 2 of Joe Pickett, and she crushed it. She crushed it.
She crushed it. But we had to
be
that
was necessary. That was unusual and necessary for that particular story. That wasn't the norm. That was it was rolling the dice.
And we spent a lot of time making sure, like, we really focused on that as if we were casting.
You didn't just see like 2 actors and go, fine, good enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a dangerous one. That, some of those are things, through experience you learn, like, oh, I wrote this amazing sequence for a day player and watched it die in front of me and then die in post.
The whole thing's going to get cut.
Totally.
I have a question for you guys, because I've never been the top rewriter. I've never been the top reviser. Do you try to create uniformity in the actions, in the non-dialogue stuff? Obviously, the dialogue you want to feel representative of every episode of the show, so it all feels like the same show. But some people have a very, in terms of like the actions and the stuff that's not dialogue, people have very different styles. You know, do you try to edit it so there's just one style, or are you like, well, this isn't going to show up on screen anyway? You know, if this is just informing, this is giving information to the costumer and the actors and the DP, but it's not going to show up on screen. So do you let it just play out? You know, I've noticed some people are very theatrical with their actions, they put a lot of humor in them, they put a lot of style into the actions. Do you try to get rid of that so it matches the tone of the actions of every episode, or do you let it be original?
I mean, for me, it's a little bit in between. I think it's like I don't really care about, I feel like people use punctuation very differently. I mean, I know I certainly use it in a crazy. I feel like the way I write is like Emily Dickinson poems, where I'm just like using dashes in ways that people have never even heard of, and I hope it's like, it's sort of an emotional, intuitive way of writing, even though an English professor would be pulling their hair out. For me, it's like anything that's distracting. So, like I said, with like adverbs, it's like sometimes it's like there are a bunch of adverbs in here, and it's like, we don't need these adverbs. It's just confusing the read. We can just lift that out, or like layers of unnecessary detail that are adding length to the script that isn't, that is necessary. Or, sometimes, I think people will write, like in the middle of a dialogue thing, let's say like Joe looks on, longingly, and Mary Beth says, Joe, what's wrong? And then it's like, Mary Beth knows there's something wrong. Like her heart is burning for like to say the true answer, but like she cannot say it, as opposed to like, no, just do parenthetical, like wants to know the answer. What I mean, that's like a terrible, but it's like the floweriness, if it's distracting from the read, because it's like a script is a functional document. A script is a document to give to a director to give to a director, actors, and production in order to get them to create things for you to put on screen. And so anything that's taken away from that, I think is stuff to live. But in terms of trying to make things uniform for the sake of it being uniform, for me,
it kind of sounds like what you're saying is it can stay original and doesn't have to be uniform as long as it's good. But if something's like a PU or, that all has to go.
Well, I'd say good is maybe a like, a judgment, you know what I mean? Like, sometimes something can be good, but in a different style that like, I'll say, sometimes like visually, you look at a script and you can see like from, I would say too, if you're in a room and you're like, to make sure your script visually looks like other script. Like there's some where it's like little bit of dialogue and then a description this long and it just blocks a text. And you're like, you can tell just from looking at it, like, oh, this is written like a novel and it's going to be either too long or too short when you actually shoot it. And, there's all these things where sometimes just visually, if you see, like you can see chunks of description that are like I try to keep all my descriptions like, a line or two, what I mean? And just keep it real simple and just keep it moving. And
I think we all do that. That it's a game that we play with ourselves of like, if I just get rid of that half sentence, or if I just get rid of that clause, I can make this 3-line thing go to 2 lines, or I can make 2 lines go to 1 line. I always do that just to keep myself entertained of like, how tight can I get these things? And I'll be willing to lose an adjective to,
Yeah. Well, and I'll say too, like just on a basic, marketing standpoint, like once it goes to the studio, they're going to see those big chunks of descriptions and be like, oh, this is going to be too expensive, because usually descriptions, dialogue is cheaper than action, because action forces people to move around into different spaces and blocking and, so like just, visually it looks two people sitting in a room is the cheapest scene you can shoot, or two people sitting outside even. You don't even have to light it then, Two people sitting on their front porch talking if there's no rain, but with a rain cover option in case, that is the cheapest scene you can shoot. Whereas, somebody, car chase or something like, and a car chase is all description. It's not, I mean, it might be like, look out, they're coming, but it's going to be mostly description. And so description equals money in studio, to the studio. So I think just having that, and then you'll see, some actors will try to, like, I know, Stace, sometimes you have a very specific way you want the actors to deliver the line. You try to put coded messages in the scene descriptions to get actors to do it exactly.
Oh my God, it's so true.
She fights back a tear and looks up to the right. And, like you'll want to like get really specific like that, try to trick them into doing it the way you see it in your mind.
Exactly. It's because I have all these fantasies. I'm like, if only I were the director and I worked on the kind of shows where we have table reads, and then I could be like, no, how about like this? Or I think the comedy is in this, and going like, oh, that's never going to happen. I'm never going to. And really, I just want to, in fact, recently I was like, could I make a musical where I just do it in front of a Zoom camera and I play all the parts? That's actually what I want to do,
Yeah, totally.
So I'm trying to do it through, I mean, I have so many parentheticals in my dialogue. It's just ridiculous. Nelson, you probably spent half year last year just deleting.
I wanted to jump back, John, to something you said earlier, though. The idea of, when you're talking about the number of, adding up the people's call numbers on their the call sheet and making sure scenes are worth it. A lesson I learned early on, this was also something I learned from Chris Fedak, showrunner I was singing the praises of in the last episode, was he'd given me something I'd written to rewrite, and it was like 3 pages over, and he wanted me to cut out 3 pages. And being young, I was sort of going, and I was like, okay, how can I shorten? And I was like taking a look at all the scenes and sort of shortening every scene. And in doing so, I was basically making all the dialogue down to its like most basic, functional thing. And I was like losing all the character. And I gave it back to him, and he was like, great, thanks. And then when the script got published, I saw he kept almost everything I'd written. He just cut scenes, or he cut a scene in half. So it's like, don't make things worse. Like, scenes still have to be great and entertaining, and but it's like the way to cut is to cut things, not to like squeeze the life out of something, which I think is a very, very valuable lesson. And that's not to say there isn't trimming to do in dialogue, but like knowing the difference between trimming the fat in something and cutting it down because you're trying to save pages, so you're losing the whole point of the
I
scene.
love that. Yeah, cutting scenes, big chunks, cut the action sequence, cut the whatever, like that, as opposed to like cutting the flavor out of like. I love that. I think that's a great.
Yeah.
I don't know, great thing to be mindful of, because it is that's what gives you the human connection to characters and stuff, is some of the downbeat moments. And if you just cut out every downbeat moment or every, the quiet moments, like, then it just feels like one thing after another at some point.
I wanted to jump to say, Nelson, one thing I noticed about how you rewrite from last season we were working together is I feel like you always remember that the scene work should be about a scene, that the scene should be about something where the characters want something rather than just being where the writer wants something. So I would write things where I thought the dialogue was really fun. So it was really just 2 characters bouncing fun dialogue back and forth. And you'd be like, no, somebody has to want something. They have to be trying to get it. They're not just there to throw out one-liners. Like, oh, yeah, good. You didn't say that, but that's what, the rewrite would come back as. Or, a lot of times you get into those scenes and you're like, oh, shit, this is going to be a tough one. I have to have people rush into the police station, give a lot of exposition, trade some clues and some exposition and run out. That's what I, the writer, have to do. But like, but the characters have to do something too. Like, why are they rushing in to trade exposition, And I feel like your rewrites were always really good at that. You were always good at remembering the characters have to want something, and the characters have to lead it, not the writer.
And so often too, when delivering exposition, like I think the best trick is make it an argument. Like, we need to like go after the thing. Like, no, we can't do that for this reason. Like, well, you're not trying very hard to do your job. Like, well, you don't know like what you're like. You can get a lot of exposition out if it's a fight, or a negotiation.
Or negotiation.
Or a negotiation of some kind. Whereas, like, just exposition, like, or it's delivered, while like running for your life, like. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, I guess that can be a form of conflict too. Like, we need to like get to the thing or it's going to explode and kill us all. Like, you can deliver exposition when running for your life or as a fight, or both.
Good old walk and talk. My absolute favorite, walk and talk.
Yeah, but just exposition in a walk and talk is, like just death,
Oh, I don't think so. I mean, it's a lot better than not walking.
Yeah, no, unless there's some sort of conflict, though. You know what I mean? Like a walk and talk, like, let me tell you about how things, started around. You know what I mean? Like, unless somebody's challenging them or arguing, I feel like that even can, just walking, to me, may not be enough to give that sparkle of momentum to exposition.
Well, and I think one of the things discovering is, it's so often you just don't need all the exposition you think you need. And, so often it's like what you actually just need is for another character to learn that exposition. And so I think especially in like crime, mystery things, it's like so much of those stories are about people learning different pieces of information and information traveling between people. And so, often that's like on the first thing you write it and it just becomes a bunch of people telling other people things that the audience has already heard. And it's like, I try to, live by a rule of like, you never say something the audience already knows. And so, getting to be fresh eyes and rewriting as opposed to, a writer is like in it and they're in the trenches trying to figure this out, being like, okay, you know what? They can just come into the police station and they say, like, Pickett, what are you doing here? And then you can cut, and now you're inside the chief's office, or the sheriff, I guess, and Pickett, and we've skipped the entire thing, and now we're just at the very, very end of that conversation, where they're gonna, put the clues together and stuff.
We notice, Doctor, we notice.
Doctor, we notice?
Yeah. Doctor...
Is that a reference I don't get?
Yeah, Kate McKinnon did this Doctor We Notice.
Okay.
On Saturday Night Live, like, we notice, like, she played, and so I have this thing that I put my glasses on when I'm not wearing them.
Here it is.
He has a little mustache, and I was
left.
That's Doctor We Notice. I keep him on my writing desk, and I'm like,
hilarious.
I was left a little too long by myself in Calgary. And he was my companion. That
was John's Wilson.
Wilson,
yeah, exactly.
That was my Wilson, and I had to thin out all these scripts and that was, I went through and it's like, what does the audience know? And I tend to write a piece of exposition in a couple places, and it's like, oh, if this scene doesn't work, we can still do it there. Or I do that partially by design, you know what I mean, when I'm writing something, and partially, sometimes it's just like, oh, that's repetitious, we don't need to see this twice, and we'll trust the audience to remember stuff. And
that can happen for exposition, but I feel like it can also happen for character interactions. Like with Waco, the Aftermath, there's this like slow seduction that rolled out over a couple of episodes, and it was supposed to roll out over 3 episodes. And you get the feeling that this woman who's in her late 60s, early 70s might fancy this young man who's in his early 20s. And they're, we kind of slowly built out this, like, are they flirting? Is this leading to something? And then, a big kiss reveal. And then you actually see it. You see the actress, and she just with one line is like, Vernon, can I see you in my room? And you're like, oh, they're gonna have sex. It took one look, and you're like, oh. Right. But another actress who wasn't as good, it might have taken. You know what I mean? But you can't tell until you shoot it.
Yeah, and that's so much of it. So one of the things I remember, Steve Shabosky, like early on, like, I'd send him everything I wrote and he'd give notes, and it was so helpful but there was all these things like, instead of the meet cute moment being like a whole scene, he'd be like, dude, you can do this with just a look, cut to a close up. He looks at her, she looks at him, they kind of smile and look away. Done. Like that's a whole scene you can do just in the fabric of something else happening. And there was just those, little moments like that where I'm like, oh, you can lean on the cinema of certain moments if it's shot right, and and if the actors are good. And I feel like there's all these scenes you write into a script that I call scaffolding scenes. Like you've written it, you've maybe even shot it, and the actors have internalized that's what this means, that's where this is going. And sometimes in their performance, because they've internalized these scenes, they give you enough of those, clues or hints that you don't actually need all the scenes. You can sort of take away the, play Jenga and pull out a bunch of the pieces. And, because the actors have, like, you can learn a lot from the subtle hints an actor can give you. And it's hard to write with that in mind.
Yeah. I think it's a hard lesson to learn also unless you've been there on set and watched it happen and then been there in post and looked on it. And, it's like the more that kind of experience you have, I think it's like the more you can trust that it's like, oh, this is a thing that's capable, and I think it's, one of the reasons why it's so important for writers to be able to go to set and produce their own episode, which, as we all know, we have a giant labor action currently happening to try to address that. But it's like it goes back to being like a script is just the first part of a fluid thing that continues until you deliver the thing. That it's all of a single piece, and you're writing the whole time.
Yeah.
This week, instead of the rapid fire 4 with Nelson, because we did that last week.
Right. I was like, oh no, do I have to come up with my favorite movie TV show again?
No, we're going to do a rapid fire 4 with Stacy, who hasn't done this before.
I haven't done it yet. I'm excited.
So, 4 questions we ask every week. What is the first television show you truly loved and why?
Okay, I'm going to go all the way back to childhood. On Friday nights, there was a block. It was The Love Boat, and then it went into Fantasy Island. And so I grew up in the suburbs, and it was nice, and it was safe and stuff. So, like, Friday nights, we'd be playing, kick the can or flashlight tag or whatever. But we would all drop everything and rush back to watch The Love Boat Fantasy Island block. And Fantasy Island was so late that I would fall asleep during it. But that's the first time I ever had, like, excitement about shows. I'm like, let's go see this show. And even though, have you seen them? They're so cheesy. If you go back and watch one, you're like, but I was like probably 6. So it was probably just right for a 6-year-old's intellect. But I will say they had the same kind of balance that I love today. They had like a little adventure and a little romance and a little comedy. And I still love that kind of writing, like the new Jumanji or Romancing the Stone or Tootsie or, I still love a well-balanced movie or TV show. And those were, in their own very corny way, well-balanced.
Yeah, that's
just
great. I love that.
Yes.
Did you actually play kick the can? Like, were you kicking actual cans? Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Not only did she play kick the can, she loves trying to get our kids to play kick the can to a point that's like a family joke. Is like, oh, mom's always trying to get us to kick the can, like whatever that is.
That's a whole joke in Diary of a Wimpy Kid too. Have you guys read those Diary of a Wimpy Kid books? Are so hysterical. They're so funny. And the Wimpy Kid character is like, my parents are always talking about kick the can. Like,
it's so Stacy.
Great game.
Okay, number 2. What is your favorite part of the job?
My favorite part of the job is using my imagination. I love it. And one of the fun things about being a writer is you can do it all the time. Yes, certainly there's like you sitting in front of a keyboard and you're writing, or you sitting in front of index cards. But there's also like what you're thinking about on the dog walk, and what you're thinking about when you fall asleep, and what you're thinking about as you drive the car. Like that's all writing. And that's kind of the part I like most, whether it's in the room or by myself, or my first part of the writing process is always to do voice memos. Like it's not, my first part of writing is just an idea that I speak out loud, and then later I go and type it in. That's how I like to do it. And I'll have hundreds of voice memos. So that's my favorite, that creation imagination.
What is the part of the job that costs you something?
Ironically, it's rewriting. First of all, no, being rewritten. I hate being rewritten. But I'm pretty lazy and I'm not super ambitious. So really,
That's
if I had
not
my
true.
a little bit. Like personality-wise, I think I'd be inclined to be like, I just want to be a co-producer forever. I just want to ride this train. I don't need all that headaches and responsibility. But then I was like, oh, I have to climb to a certain level in the hierarchy of writing. Otherwise, I will be rewritten. And I hate being rewritten. Like, I don't cry. I'm not a crier. When I get rewritten, I just cry my eyes out.
Well, as someone who has rewritten you, I now am
Nelson.
just feeling a weight of guilt sitting on my shoulders, imagining you in the shower crying. How quick she goes from complimenting me to letting me in on her pain.
It's true. It's true. But then the problem is, I also don't enjoy rewriting myself. I love the first time it comes out. I love when I come up with an idea, and I love when I say it in the voice memo, and I love when I write it for the first time. And then when I write it like maybe the second time, it's okay. By the time I'm writing something like the 18th time, I was like, damn, I wish I were a coal miner. It'd be so much more interesting than being a writer. It just gets so boring that it's, yeah. So I don't like rewriting. I know writing is rewriting, but I wish it weren't. I just want to improv everything.
If you had a time machine, what one piece of advice would you give yourself when you started your television journey?
I would tell myself to just go ahead and get in a room earlier. Because I think I mentioned earlier in this episode that, I was an actor. I did sketch comedy for a lot of times. And people would say, like, do you want to get in a room? Is that a goal of yours? And I'd say, would I be free to leave to audition? They'd be like, of course not. They're like, well, then I don't want to be in a room. And it didn't occur to me like, oh, I could write my own stuff. I could do my own, or I could try to, So I avoided being in rooms. And also, I still feel this way, but I felt it really strongly before. I'm so scared of being trapped. You hear those war stories about, I have a friend whose husband wrote on Joey, which was what's it called? The follow-up to Friends.
Yeah.
The Friends spinoff.
Oh my God.
And she said her husband was in that room until 11 p.m. every night. Those were the good nights. They were there till 11 p.m. He had children he never saw. And I'm like, for Joey? You know what I mean? So I was I never even saw Joey. And I love Friends. Joey was probably fine. That actor's amazing. It was probably good. I've tried to see it. I don't think you can see it now. But I was so scared of having a boss who gave me insane hours that I just avoided the whole thing. So I wasn't in my first room until I was in my late 40s. So I think I'd just go back and be like, hey, why don't you do it in your 20s when, I don't know.
Well,
I'd say I'd do it earlier. But life is long. You can join things late. It's fine.
Yeah, I think you can find out which rooms, different rooms have different, like we tend to, be like a 10 to 4 kind of, environment where it's pretty reasonable, and other people are the same, where it's not all 11 p.m.
Yeah.
Like more hours writing does not
11
necessarily
PM.
equal. What's that?
I've never had a room like that. I had a room that would go to 7 regularly, but I also think room times have come down in general. I feel like post-COVID, everyone's kind of in like, yeah, maybe we just stay in rooms less long, even in person rooms, which I think is good. It's show up, do the job more efficiently, and you don't spend an hour and a half talking about where you're going to go for lunch type of thing.
Yeah, and have more time to be a human being and have the kind of experiences you can write about,
Yeah.
Yes, that's it. I would never want to stop being a person to be a worker. That's not me. I'm not a workaholic. But by the way, the first time I ever did try to get into a room, and it wasn't even trying to get in a room, it was like a side hustle kind of thing. I had a friend who was directing episodes of The Man Show. Do you guys remember The Man Show? Where the girls would jump in bikinis on trampolines.
Yeah.
My friend and I, who wrote sketch comedy at the time, we submitted some sketches to them of like, and their response was, it's just not Man Show material.
Yeah.
It's like, wow. Ouch.
Thanks for doing those, Stace. And Nelson,
fun.
thank you so
for
much.
having me.
Yeah, really such a pleasure talking with you and working
You
with
guys
you
as
and
well.
stuff. Cool. All right.
All right.
Tip of the hat.
Thank you.
Off to pick it.
See ya.
See you guys.